So I recently finished playing Resident Evil 3 Remake, and before that I played Resident Evil 2 Remake. But I kinda know, I've heard that how much hate the remake of Resident Evil 3 has gotten throughout the years, and right now I'm curious to know why. I enjoyed Resident Evil 3 Remake a lot. I thought it had a good story and stuff, but maybe that's only because I don't know anything about the original. So this whole video is going to be about all the differences between the remake and the original of Resident Evil 3, and if I can, I'm gonna also watch all of the cut contents and see a video from a person who absolutely hated the remake. So are you ready, guys? Let's go watch them together. So the first video I'm going to watch is from a channel called Jay's Reviews, and the title is Resident Evil 3 Original vs Remake, and let's just watch it together now. This is the original? Nemesis.
Going into this game blind was an interesting case for me because I barely knew anything about the original RE3 from 1999 before actually playing it. Might sound weird considering that last year I did a review on Resident Evil 3 from 2020. RE3 got remade for PS4, Xbox One, and PC, however that game, which I obviously have played, received a lot of flack from fans due to it not being a faithful remake of the PS1 classic, and just not really being a standout game on its own. For the video I did last year, I chose to focus on how RE3 Make was a letdown as a sequel to RE2 Make, which was one of my favorite games of all time and still is. So going into the original RE2, I was curious to see how I'd feel about the game that inspired one of my favorites, but for this, I was basically playing a game I just have no experience with or knowledge of outside of basic plot details, and then I'll be able to join the discourse on how RE3 Make compares to the original. Like last time, for my actual thoughts on how RE3 Make handles as a game on its own, you can check out my original video. I'll be bringing it up mostly out of comparison to the original today. So circling back to what the video is about, how did I feel about RE3? Fans in my comment section seem to really enjoy it and hold it up as one of the best in the series, so I was hoping I'd feel much the same. In addition to that, how do I feel about the 2020 remake after having played the original? Well, let's begin and find out. Going off of its development history, I always categorized RE3 as a glorified side game, like RE 2.5 more than an actual new game. So actually playing it revealed a lot about how wrong I was, because Resident Evil 3 adds quite a lot of improvements to the presentation and to the gameplay. In the former category, the character models have been improved with each game. In RE1, you could sort of make out details in the characters' faces, but on the whole, the models look like a blob of pixels. RE2 made improvements in that each character had a more visible face. RE3 is the best the series has seen thus far in that the models looked much cleaner. The arms, for example, looked like arms and not individual pieces put together like in the previous game. It's also really nice how RE3 keeps the pace up by allowing you to skip cutscenes with the press of the select button. Not being able to skip cutscenes in a game like RE dampens the replay value, so skipping cutscenes is a feature I greatly appreciated on my second playthrough of RE3. Next, RE3 introduces some mainstays for the series. When you open your inventory at the start of the game, you'll see two books that explain the game's mechanics in depth. One of your starting items is this reloading tool. Throughout the game, you'll find various types of gunpowder, and you can then use them with the reloading tool to get more ammo for your weapons. Mixing and matching different gunpowder types produces ammo for your different weapons, although I usually just combine Type A's together to get a crap ton of handgun bullets, and then did the same for the Type B's I found to get a ton of shotgun shells. Later games would remove the reloading tool part of it though, which I think makes sense. It's a middleman you probably need a trip to the item box for anyway. In later entries, such as the remake of Resident Evil 3, it's changed to where you just combine the different types of gunpowder and the result is more ammo for your weapons, while still giving you the customization that the original RE3 provided. When actually controlling your character, RE3 makes a critical improvement. By pressing down and the run button, Jill and newcomer Carlos will do a 180-degree turn, allowing you to quickly move in the opposite direction from where you were facing. The quick turn being something that still appeared in all the games going forward because it's a great addition to the player's moveset. Especially useful in a game like RE3 because of the fact that the game has a plentiful amount of tight corridors for its level design. So RE3 is without a doubt a full sequel to RE2, not a glorified side game like I was expecting, as it adds crucial mechanics and improvements to the formula that would still be in effect for all the coming games. An important part of the series' evolution from a gameplay perspective. Now, I want to say all the new mechanics and features of RE3 are a hit, but that wouldn't be accurate. RE3 also introduced a thing called the emergency dodge, where if an enemy is about to attack you, pressing the R1 button will cause Jill or Carlos to dodge out of the way. R1 is also the aim button, so when your gun is drawn, you have to press the shoot button to do this. On paper, I like it. A frame-perfect dodge mechanic is right up my alley. However, I feel like the dodge in RE3 is trash. If they wanted a frame-perfect mechanic that only advanced players would get to...
So this is Nemesis in the original. He's so small in the original. In the remake, he looks way more scarier and bigger and, I don't know, more threatening. But I don't know how he used to behave in the original. I don't know.
There are numerous examples I recall where I would dodge an attack, but
Is
while
this
in
a
recovery
hunter?
frames from said dodge, the attack I dodged would still be active and then I just get hit by that attack. That should just not be allowed. If a game has a frame-perfect dodge mechanic you have to learn the timing for, you should be rewarded for that by granting like several frames of invincibility. As is, the dodge still allowing me to take damage is my biggest issue with how RE3 plays. It was the leading cause of frustration on my second playthrough of the game. By contrast, the remake really improved this part of it. Jill has a dedicated dodge move in the remake, one you can use to get away from the enemies, even if they aren't near you, which comes in handy when you're low on health and want to quickly get away from the zombie hordes. If you use the right timing with it, then you'll dodge the enemy's attack and time will slow down, allowing you to get hits in with whatever weapons you have equipped.
Oh.
That's a simple change and I'm a big fan of it. It fixes my issue with the old dodging completely. It still takes skill and timing to use, and so you get rewarded for pulling it off. It's especially satisfying as Carlos as you just punch enemies right in the face and send them flying backwards. But I'll say this, I grew to really hate the enemies in relation to the camera in the remake. There were several instances where I'd be fighting with an enemy and then get attacked, or worse, killed by an enemy I couldn't see that was right behind me.
Yeah, exactly.
What an idiot I am for my inability to...
This happened to me so many times in the last boss fight. The zombies in the boss arena, I couldn't see them. I was just looking at the tyrant, the Nemesis, and they would just come there out of nowhere and grab me and kill me.
Predict that. Although, while we're comparing the original to the remake, best to talk about the level design. Here is where the remake falls considerably short. This is already where it fell short compared to RE2's remake, which has some of the best level design I've experienced in the series thus far. But I'll say again, I was expecting RE3 to be a smaller game than previous ones. The remake feeling really short certainly didn't help with that, but I was very surprised. RE3 is a big game. Maybe the biggest in the series thus far. RE3 only features one campaign, where you start off as Jill and play as Carlos for a brief bit later in the game.
Look at
when
Carlos.
RE1 and 2 had 2 campaigns each to experience. Well, you could say RE2 had 4, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, 4.
RE3 made up for its lack of a second campaign by having the longest singular campaign in the series so far. It took me about 6.5 hours to get through my first ever run of RE1, and about 5 hours to get through my first campaign in RE2. It took me over 10 hours to get through RE3 the first time. This game achieves that through 2 methods. The first is that from a pure content perspective, RE3's campaign just has the most in it. Here in RE3, I would say that the areas you play still have that RE2 thing going on where none of them are super large and complex, however it just has more of them. In RE1, we had the mansion, the guardhouse, the mansion continued, which probably doesn't count as a new area, but there's enough new that I figured I'd include it. The underground and the lab. In RE2, you had the RPD, the sewers, and another lab that RE2 make named the Nest. In RE3, you explore the streets of Raccoon City, the RPD, the streets continued, the clock tower, the hospital, the park, and the dead factory. So yeah, on its own, the park isn't a super long segment of gameplay, but RE3 uses this longer list of levels to provide the best of the RE formula in quick bursts.
Maybe that's
You get to the
content.
clock tower, for example, and do what you've come to expect. Explore around, find areas you can and cannot go, and look around for items that allow you into the areas you couldn't get to before, which house puzzles that you solve for more items that further your ability to get through the location. I'm a broken record at this point, but that basic design from RE1 just still holds up and provides entertainment in every game. So yeah, RE3's areas might not be Spencer Mansion tier on their own, but it has a consistent set of levels that keep the variety up with the different visuals and puzzle gimmicks while maintaining the exploration value I love about these games from top to bottom. The level design is where RE3 make fails the most. Here you have the Raccoon City streets, the sewers, the RPD as Carlos, the hospital as Carlos, and finally another underground lab. After having played both games, I really do believe the pros of RE2 make outweigh the issues that arise from it having cut content from the original game, like the alligator boss. But after having played both of these, I think RE3 make goes too far. For starters, as a level, the city streets are nothing like the original. It's a tiny hub area where you, yes, do have to explore to find things to progress. RE3 Remake doesn't fail at that, it just provides it in the most limited capacity I have seen in the series thus far. Raccoon City in the remake is a main hub area with a couple of different sides to explore. One of them being this new area with these spider monsters that I didn't even enjoy playing because the enemies poison you, making you really slow until you heal. It also only lasts like 6 minutes if you know what you're doing, so there's that too.
I had no problem with this part.
Raccoon City was huge. You had to explore the entire uptown and downtown, going into various buildings like the bar, a restaurant, the news building, the gas station, and so on. At least RE3 Remake had bad box art Mega Man at the toy store. There was that. But moving on from that, the fact that major areas from the original RE3 aren't in the remake becomes a problem because what's there instead isn't great. You have to play another sewers level, which isn't as complex or interesting as the one from RE2 Make, and at the end of the game you have to play another lab, which isn't as good as the one from RE2 Make. I think this problem was born from the fact that the RE3 remake was released just a little over a year after the Resident Evil 2 remake. I don't know when this game started development, but on the whole, it seems pretty rushed, so they just couldn't make new areas. They instead reused settings from Remake 2. It's so shameless that the lab at the end is literally called The Nest 2. The issue isn't that these new areas are atrocious. Like I said, they still have what I want in an RE3.
What is this knife? What is this knife Jill is holding? I didn't have this knife. It's on fire? Is it something you get in your second playthrough or something?
Game from a level design perspective, it's just that areas being so similar to what was in RE2 Make draws comparison to that game, and since it's not a fraction as good, it sits in the shadow of that game. But then, by not including key areas from the original RE3, it just doesn't hold up as a great remake of that game. It's just a shame, as I'm sure with more dev time, more areas would have been included, and with that, RE3 Remake would be able to stand on its own 2 feet much more than it does today. Credit where credit is due though. I thought the hospital level was good. I think the original was decent, but the puzzles were really simple. For example, you needed a voice sample to get on the elevator, and the tape of the guy's voice is on the desk right next to the door. But the remake forces you to look around for that tape on the upper floors to use on the door on the first floor. Then, once Carlos's portion is done, you can go back through it as Jill to find some extra upgrades for the end game. So like I said, this was a good level. Can't take that away from Remake 3. About 1,000 words ago, I was saying that RE3 managed to be the longest game in the series so far in 2 ways. The first was the sheer level count, but the second was because RE3 is the hardest game in the PS1 trilogy. I am fully willing to admit this. I got my ass royally handed to me while playing RE3.
It was harder.
I sucked at this game. The game floods the areas with zombies you have to face off against, and so contending with that always drains my health bar, and then the bosses just wrecked me. Whether it be this giant worm boss or the various fights with Nemesis or whatever, I just died over and over and over.
You had a worm boss fight in the original. There are many cut contents then. The clock tower, we didn't have that. And a bar, we didn't have a bar really in the remake.
Again. I was literally on this courtyard Nemesis fight for upwards of maybe even longer than an hour. Now, it's entirely possible that if I reviewed this game blind, say, 5 years ago, my line of thinking would stop there and I just list all the various ways the game beat the stuffing out of me. That's our obligatory Sly reference for today. Like this part where you need to get back to the train to get to the clock tower. Nemesis was guarding the entrance, but with my being in the danger state, my getting past him was a nigh impossibility. But I kept trying over and over again, even with it being a lost cause. I was pretty sure I used all the health there was in the streets, so what now? Am I screwed? However, I just thought it was really important for me to play RE3 a second time, knowing what to expect and seeing how my experience changed. And my suspicions were confirmed. I had a much smoother time with RE3 the second go around and can easily tell you the game is really damn good. Although, while on the subject of playing the game a second time, this one creates replay value in numerous ways. On my first playthrough, I died in the hospital and had to play it again, but was really thrown off by the fact that the solution to this moving shelf puzzle was different from before. My first thought is, maybe I'm just remembering it wrong, but I was not. Entire puzzle solutions are changed up whenever you encounter them, whether that be from death or a new run. This keeps things interesting as you still have to work to solve the puzzles on your first few playthroughs of the game, instead of just rushing through them since you already know the solution. But while I'm talking about the replayability of RE3, I'd be a fool not to mention the Nemesis choice system. At several points of RE3, you'll have to make a choice between one of 2 things. When Nemesis first appears, you have to decide if you're going to try and fight him or if you're going to run inside the RPD. In many cases, picking the more difficult option will net you an advantage. For example, blowing Nemesis up in the restaurant or shocking him at the clock tower will net you items like a super powerful handgun. Now, I believe he drops more items if you keep beating him in the regular gameplay, but do I look like I have those skills at the current moment in time?
Actually, in the remake, they didn't give us the choice. I just knew from Resident Evil 2 remake that I had to run away, but in the meantime, I shot at him when he was after me, and yeah, he dropped those cases that had upgrades and all kind of amazing stuff. So yeah, they took away the Nemesis choice in the remake. And the level designs are different, and there are some cut contents too. I think that's enough to piss off Resident Evil original fans.
First Nemesis appearance is a great example of providing an advantage. Nemesis just killed Brad in this scene, and if you grab his STARS card, you can use it on the computer by the entrance of the RPD, which tells you the passcode for the locker the STARS office key is being held in. If you didn't grab Brad's card, you'd have to further traverse the RPD to find Jill's card and then run back to the computer. It's more daunting to try and survive Nemesis at this point in the game, but the reward is a run with a little less backtracking. The factory is an interesting case because if you choose to push Nemesis off the bridge, Jill will enter the factory from the door, but if you just dive off the bridge yourself, you get in through the underground portion. Because of these choices, the story will play out in different ways, like how in my first playthrough, Jill had to shoot Nikolai out of the sky and escape on a chopper alongside Carlos and Barry from the first game. But then in my second, Nikolai just gets killed by Nemesis earlier in the level, and then Jill and Carlos can escape without needing Barry to rescue them. What better reward for replaying a game is there than these tiny story changes? You might then wonder, how does the remake handle this? Haven't talked about that game in a few minutes. The answer is that RE3 Remake doesn't even have the Nemesis choices in it at all. Another point of replayability zapped away from the remake completely. On that note, Nemesis was terrible in the remake across the board. The original Nemesis was a really cool enemy, taking what had been done with the Tyrant in RE2 and massively improving it. Nemesis has been programmed by Umbrella to hunt down all the members of STARS, as it was established in RE2 that the surviving STARS members are trying to reveal what Umbrella had done after RE1. Nemesis successfully kills Brad and then goes after Jill with nothing held back. Nemesis adds a lot of tension to RE3 as he sprints at you full speed and you feel like a real pro gamer if you escape without taking damage. But then you know he's still out there and could strike at any moment, so the relief is temporary. Especially because the game plays this ominous music whenever Nemesis is nearby and ready to attack, but just hasn't started yet. He could literally be anywhere.
So in the original, Nemesis is kind of like Mr. X. He's constantly following you. And I remember that constant fear that I used to feel when I was playing Resident Evil 2. And yeah, Resident Evil 2 was more terrifying every minute of it because I was always on my toes because anytime Mr. X could show up, but we didn't have that in the Resident Evil 3 remake. He would just show up in cutscenes and then we knew that after the cutscene we are gonna run away. And yeah, that took away some of the fear, probably. The choices, I don't know why. Why did they remove that?
Great for keeping the player's stress up. In the remake, I'm assuming the devs saw how much people loved Mr. X in the RE2 remake and wanted to recreate that effect, since the expectations would naturally be high given that they're remaking RE3. But, like I said, it's awful. Remake Nemesis is comedically not threatening. Like when you go into the toy store, he'll just stand there waiting for you. Not bust through the wall like he's obviously capable of doing otherwise. He just keeps standing there. It's hilarious. Or how taking him down is as simple as one grenade. One grenade! That's so lame. The parts where he actually chases you are in short supply compared to both the original Nemesis and Mr. X from RE2 make. So he doesn't even provide that tension he did in the original. Instead, they just use Nemesis as a way to load the game up with RE4-esque action scenes, which isn't the end of the world, but if things like this are what defines Nemesis instead of the thing he actually did in the original, it's just a downgrade. No better comparison than the intro of Nemesis in both games. On PS1, Brad tells Jill that someone's after STARS, but you don't know what, and then later Nemesis just drops in and murders Brad right before your very eyes, showing you what you're up against, and then the gameplay does not disappoint. In the remake, the very first thing that happens after this out-of-place first-person walking segment is Nemesis bursting through the wall, which leads to an Uncharted escape scene where the entire apartment building goes up in flames. But if we're talking about the story, I won't rag on RE3 Remake completely. In RE2, I was really surprised to see just how in-depth I thought the plot was in the original game since the remake left out so many of the finer details. By comparison, I think RE3 Remake did a good job adapting the plot of the game, which is impressive given the fact that so many of the original game's stages were cut. But I will begin by saying that I think the original RE3 sold me on the weight of its story much more. RE3's plot actually begins shortly before the events of RE2. When Leon and Claire arrive in town, the city's already dead and overrun with zombies. RE3 begins with the zombie takeover just beginning.
Yeah.
In fact, the opening cutscene just drops you right into the action, as we see the cops and the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service trying to hold the line against the zombies, but most of them dying. I'm sure this has been seen in a gazillion zombie movies, however I was pretty into it with RE3. If you've been playing the series since RE1, you know what Umbrella's virus is capable of, especially after RE2, but to then get into RE3 and...
Well, I haven't played Resident Evil 1, but I have watched the story for that game. I know everything about the mansion, about what Umbrella did, about Captain Wesker. I know everything, and I'm currently watching a playthrough of it, so no problem there.
Actually see the city as it's falling apart and explore the areas that were once normal that are now on fire or filled with zombies sold me on how much of a disaster this situation is.
Wow.
Especially with this somber, desolate music they play at the beginning of the game.
They removed this cut scene as well. That would have been good to have a cut scene in which the officers shoot at
Halfway through the
zombified
game,
people.
there's a time skip to after the events of RE2 have taken place as Raccoon City is on its last legs, completely overrun beyond repair, making you wonder, how is this game gonna end? The answer is that the government fires a nuclear missile that wipes Raccoon City off the face of the earth.
Nuclear, yeah.
Actually showing you the city being reduced to atoms, followed by a broadcast saying that the casualties are in the hundreds of thousands. All that's in the remake. I just think the original game makes the gradual fall of Raccoon City a little more impactful as the culmination of everything you've seen in the trilogy thus far. And that's because you actually explore Raccoon City much more in the original than you do in the remake. But like RE2 Remake, I do think RE3's remake succeeds at the characterization. For example, Jill not trusting Carlos because of his being with Umbrella is a passing footnote in the original, but in the remake it's a relationship that fully develops throughout the game as Carlos shows through action that he's only here to help people. Carlos says in the PS1 game that he's just the hired gun, but in the remake he has no idea that Umbrella's evil and discovers that for himself throughout the story.
What? You mean Carlos in the original wasn't this good? I love the Carlos in the remake. He didn't know what he was doing. He was just doing his job, and his job was to protect people. He was a decent human being, but it looks like Carlos in the original wasn't like that. He maybe cared about money. He was a hired hand. He didn't care.
Being a character I really enjoyed all the screen time of as a comedic but reliable side character.
Yeah.
Background characters also get a lot more screen time here too, like Tyrell, who's killed by Nikolai in the original game but doesn't do anything outside of that. But in the remake, he's trying to help Jill and Carlos, and when he dies, you feel that extra bit of urgency to get the vaccine for the T-virus so they can stop the city from being nuked, which is a plot point they use to make the villain, Nikolai, even more despicable than he was in the original. In the old RE3, he was pretty bad, knowing from the start that the city was lost, but Umbrella just wanted to see how the T-virus fared in live military combat, so he's being paid to collect that data. He's just out to make bank. But in the remake, he gets every chance under the sun to show how he's the most cocky kind of pure evil, even destroying the vaccine, dooming Raccoon City. So
Yeah,
all in all,
why?
it's just like RE2, where I really got into the story and characters of the remake, but I think the original has more impact with its plot points. But I don't feel like you miss a lot going off of the remake alone this time. Hell, there's even a piece of writing that explains the events of RE1, and that it's the T-virus taking over the city, which RE2 Make didn't really clarify. The only thing about the remake story I thought didn't work was just the way it opened and ended. I mentioned how good the opening cutscene of the original game is, and then the remake just opens up with this assortment of real-life footage that has nothing to do with a zombie takeover, followed by some Umbrella propaganda, when the original game's opening just got you into the action much more effectively. The city still got nuked at the end, but I feel the ending is more abrupt. We don't see the damage report or these character epilogues that the original game had, which shows the status of every major character in the series so far.
Really?
It allowed the game to feel more satisfying, which shows the status of every...
I'm sorry guys, I have to read this. After escaping the city, Jill set out to join Chris Redfield. Really? However, all she found was an empty hideout of Chris's. On the floor was Chris's knife. Jill left without hesitation because she firmly believes that Chris is still alive. She will search for him until she finds him. Then they can go and put an end to Umbrella.
major character in the series.
Okay, this is Carlos, right? Please forgive me, Claire. No. This is Chris. Chris Redfield has just finished this letter with his signature phrase, As he removes his sunglasses, a lady walks by him with light steps. She looks about the same age as Claire. He thinks. A short time later, Chris discovered that his sister was looking for him but was caught. Oh.
So far, it allowed the game to feel more satisfying as the end of the Raccoon City trilogy, if that's what you want to call it. Past that, I don't have too much else to add on RE3 as a game. I pretty much said my piece in the level design of RE3 and RE3 Remake earlier, so talking about the final levels at this point would be a bit redundant. Lastly, the remake had another missed opportunity at the end. The final Nemesis choice gives you the ability to kill the thing once and for all, and after a whole game of him hunting down the STARS members, Jill goes,
"You want stars? I'll give you stars."
The remake just tosses
I want to
that-
watch that again.
Stars.
You want stars?
The
I'll give
remake
you
just tosses
stars.
that line in 1/3 of the way through the game when there was this perfect moment for it at this monstrosity of a final boss. But like I said, that's basically all I've got for RE3. This was the game where I had to process my thoughts on it the most after I played it twice, and in conclusion, I think RE3 is pretty good. The main thing that keeps me thinking it is that way is because of the well-designed levels and exploration. I just can't get enough of that from the classic styled RE games.
Thank you so much, Jay's Reviews. And we're going to move on to the next video actually here. Alright guys, this second video is from Ruby of Blue. This video also says all the things from the previous one, but with minor differences. For example, this has a chapter, enemies, the difference between the enemies. I'm gonna watch that one.
Now let's move on to enemies.
Enemies.
OG RE3, like RE2, featured a roster of both returning and new
Carlos.
enemies that kept you on your toes and varied the gameplay and how you fought them.
These
the
are
zombie dogs
hunters.
in OG were fast-moving threats with a low hitbox, so you had to find ways to deal with them that didn't just involve unloading from far away. Like RE2 Make, 3's remake criminally underuses the zombie dogs, literally only appearing twice with 4 total in the game.
Thank
Given
God.
how little HP they have, I have no idea why they didn't have them rush you down in large packs that actually challenge you. The Drain Dumos and Brain Suckers were pretty dynamic in how they were fought, and sort of function as RE3's liquor.
What is
they can
this?
either stay low and
Is this
swipe at you
liquor?
or stand up and rush you down, giving you a chance to counterattack. They often attack in pairs, which gets really dicey as they also begin crawling on the walls and ceiling to disorient you, especially if they start spitting poisonous bile at you too. In RE3 Make, they've been demoted to a
The lickers in the original kind of remind me of those spider enemies in Silent Hill 2 Remake. You remember those also used to go on the walls? Ugh, that was so disgusting.
cannon fodder gimmick enemy. They've been made much smaller with a low amount of health. Now they'll implant a parasite down Jill's throat in which you have to use an herb to puke it back up. Given that they only appear in this one-off area and their variants the Brain Suckers are gone entirely, I'd say they're pretty underwhelming. The Hunters returned in OG in the form of the Hunter Betas. Behaving and being fought pretty much identically to the Hunters of RE1, a little less cheap though, where keeping them at bay and not getting overwhelmed by their quick movements was a priority lest you risk being stun-locked by a group or insta-kill.
These
In RE3
originals
Make,
are
they're
way
much the same,
harder.
however, they've been given an armor-like hide you must destroy first, before you can get at their fleshy goodness, which I'd say is a welcome shakeup. I also love how agile they are when dodging your shots. That really makes you stay on your toes. However, their insta-kill this time around is a hell of a lot less clearly telegraphed, and whenever it happens, it just feels like the game randomly deciding to pull you into a cutscene to kill you.
Yeah! Sometimes I would die from a hunter by first hit, even though my health was full. But sometimes I'll get 2 hits and I was still breathing. I don't know, it was so random.
RE3 Make introduces a few new enemies not seen in the original. The first of which are the head parasites that Nemesis plants on zombies'
these are
heads.
new
They're
ones?
similar to the Plaga heads of RE4 and have a long reach with their tentacles to hit you from afar, which is hard to dodge. Since most of the enemies here are very close quarters oriented, this is a great addition that adds another dimension to combat when they're around. The second new enemy, or well, not really,
these
I
are
guess,
new?
are the Pale Heads, which
Really?
have simply been recycled from RE2 Make's Ghost Survivors mode. Basically a different zombie variant, they will regenerate health at a fast rate, so you need to deal damage to them faster and harder than they can heal themselves.
Wow.
The third are the Lickers. Even if it's just recycling content from RE2 Make, these guys are a welcome addition to the RPD segment and add some nice cohesion between the two games. They're just as great to fight here as they are in RE2 Make, encouraging extreme caution when they're around them, or going fucking ham. As we get into the enemies RE3 Make callously cuts, like 2, we come to the Hunter Gamma and Gravedigger. In OG, the Hunter Gamma was a variant of the beta, with the unique ability to swallow you whole as their insta-kill move. And the Gravedigger was a giant boss enemy you encounter once in an
didn't have
underground
that.
segment, and again in the park to kill for good. where you had to stay on top of where it would pop up and lure it into an electricity trap that you could set for it. In
Oh.
RE3 Remake, in the interest of rush development it seems, these enemies have been fused together to form a giant raw chicken, behaving way more
Raw
like the
chicken
Gravedigger
looks
than the
like a
Hunter Gamma.
fish.
You must keep this enemy at bay with a powerful weapon lest you be gulped up. The actual Hunter Gamma and Gravedigger are just gone, meaning the only non-Nemesis boss fight in OG has been gutted. Likewise, the Gravedigger's brethren, the Sliding Worms, are also gone. In OG, they would surround and attach to you, draining your health.
Oh.
Just think of how grotesque these babies could have been with modern visuals. And here we go again. The crows and spiders have seen the chopping block yet again.
Spiders.
I seriously
I'm
don't
glad the
understand what these
spiders are
remakes have
gone.
against these
Oh,
enemies.
Jesus
They're
Christ.
a trademark of the classic Resident Evil enemy roster. They don't even have the excuse this time of, oh well, they
Crows.
barely appeared anyway, because the crows and spiders were put to good use in RE3. The crows would either suddenly pop out and force a panic situation on you, which fit with their design of encouraging staying on the move to avoid being pecked to death, or conversely would be at rest in areas, encouraging you to tread lightly so as not to stir them up.
So we had crows. We had them in Resident Evil 1 as well. They were one of the main, I don't know, enemies in both of the games, but we don't have any in Resident Evil 2 Remake or Resident Evil 3 Remake.
The spiders, like the brain Demos, disoriented you by crawling around on the walls and ceilings. Killing them would also release a ton of baby spiders, so you couldn't stick around long after dispatching them. They
Wow.
also inhabited tight corridors that made traversing them without putting them down put you at risk of being poisoned.
Oh, God.
Surprisingly, RE3 Remake removes blue herbs as well as poison, which is no
Yeah.
longer a thing. So, can we all please just agree that cutting enemies in what's supposed to be a remake is not okay? There's limitless potential in all the creative ways you can use these enemies to make the entire experience more varied and content-rich. Even for the enemies that were simply variants of each other, you can find tons of ways to make them more distinct. Like, say, giving the Hunter Gamma a tongue-lashing attack, or making the brain suckers emit dangerous acid within a close proximity when shot. Even if an enemy in the original had room for improvement, improve them! Don't cut them! They're pieces of the original game's identity that are being abandoned for no good reason.
Yeah, this remake was
Speaking of
rushed,
throwing things
probably.
away, now we're on to level design and areas on offer.
Okay, so we already saw the location section in the previous video, so I'm going to move next to actually Jill section.
Overall, this intro doesn't really feel like a good stand-in for the desperate last stand of the original. OG also
Okay.
started us with a solemn narration from Jill talking about how Umbrella controlled Raccoon City and her attempts to bring justice to them, only for it all to end in tragedy because nobody dared to oppose them. It sets up her character as one of the more insightful and justice-minded Resi protagonists. In RE3 Remake, that intro has been removed, and we now begin playing with Jill having a recurring nightmare about being infected. She's become understandably paranoid about it, and considering what happens later in the game, I like this added aspect. After she wakes up, we get to explore her apartment, another welcome addition, learning how she's continued investigating on her own to an
Okay.
obsessive degree. And you can even find a pizza with a note from Brad reassuring
Yeah.
her to keep her chin up, which is great. But I do wish Jill still began with a heavy monologue about the nature of justice here.
It's true that once the wheels of justice begin to turn, nothing can stop them. Nothing.
Because I think it was an important intro to who she was. Jill now narrates in the ending anyway, so an opening monologue would have made that seem less out of the blue.
All this death.
Why Carlos has a straight hair here? I don't understand.
It was greed. Human greed.
While we're talking about Jill, I'd like to go over her design. I think she's been beautifully modeled in this game. Her face isn't of Julia Voth's, but she's still identifiably Jill, what with her stern expression. Her voice actress does a great job, but I wish they had given her a deeper voice as she had in 1, 3, and Remake.
I'm sorry about your daughter, but there isn't gonna be any rescue. We have to get out of here.
But it seems like ever since 5, Capcom has given up on that idea. Her default costume is also pretty great. The thing with OG's Jill design is that, while very stylish and iconic, it wasn't properly contextualized. Jill is characterized as an intelligent and serious-minded character. She's not like Ada, who deliberately dresses in style on serious missions for fun, so the tube top and miniskirt doesn't make much sense for her to wear. So redesigning her made sense, and I'd say they did a great job staying faithful to the original design, unlike someone else I know. She still
Really?
bears her upper torso, has a blue top, with white around her waist, and black bottoms. The only element I'd say is missing would be the brown from her long boots. All this said, I think the better approach would have been to keep the original design, but like I said, better contextualize it. It's vaguely implied in OG that she left her apartment that way because she was in a hurry, But even then, that doesn't make much sense since she has a white jacket wrapped around her waist she can put on at any time. So, just like in RE3 Remake, clearly convey that she wouldn't have had time to change into something more fitting and show her initially wearing the coat. Then, shortly after, you can show her having to cross through a fire-ridden alleyway, in which Jill then takes off the jacket and wraps it around her waist, telling the audience that it's flammable. After that, since Nemesis has been given a flamethrower in the remake anyway, have that be the reason Jill leaves it around her waist for the rest of the game. I think that would have been the best approach. But either way, her new design still looks great, and the classic costume has been faithfully recreated for use anyway, even if turning your skirt into a skirt is kind of an odd choice. After getting a panicked call from Brad, Nemesis bursts into Jill's apartment, and yeah, this is pretty much a worse introduction for him. In OG, Brad first mentioned him, vaguely suggesting that they're being hunted. So that builds up tension to the point where you meet Brad again in the RPD, where Nemesis finally appears and shows you firsthand the threat he is by killing Brad. In RE3 Remake, all that build-up is traded for him just breaking into Jill's place right at the start, and goddamn linear set piece. And can I say Nemesis' design in this game frankly looks ridiculous? I don't so much have a problem with his face, even if his teeth are kinda dumb looking, but getting rid of his cool black trench coat in favor of garbage bags and caution tape looks really stupid. Especially here where he has it wrapped around his head. Once Jill's outside, we meet Brad, still looking the same as ever. Brad in OG was frankly unhelpful and very cowardly, ditching Jill for no reason the moment that we met him. Here, he's a lot more likable, legitimately feeling like one of Jill's longtime partners and friends.
Yeah.
Well, for the 60 seconds you get to spend with him, that is, because he is killed off ridiculously quickly. Not even by Nemesis either, just bit by a zombie. After which the game thrusts us into yet more linear set pieces where we meet Dario, acting less like a shell-shocked hysterical man who has lost his daughter.
What? What do you think you're talking
Yeah,
about?
I remember this guy.
I just lost my daughter out there. How dare you tell me to go back outside?
And more like a cartoonish jackass.
And yeah, right. You just
Yeah.
want to steal my safe.
I didn't know he had a daughter. In the remake, he didn't mention a daughter, or did he?
And we don't even get to return here later to find him dead or find his journal.
Yeah,
After a lot
I
of
wish-
stupid scripted nonsense, we meet Carlos super early as he takes down Nemesis for us, carrying Jill away to the actual start of the game. God, this is
Excuse me, I cannot not say it. Why his Carlos has a straight hair? Is this something you get in the second playthrough or what?
entire roller coaster of an intro feels like it should have been an actual level to explore, with Brad as the supporting character. At the end of which, then he could have died, and then we could have met Carlos. Jill then hooks up with the UBCS. The redesigns of their combat uniforms seems really unnecessary, especially Carlos with his new hairstyle and facial hair, but at least the classic look is still available along with Jill's.
Well, not gonna lie, I like the Carlos with curly hair and facial hair better. This is just me. It's just I think he looked more handsome with that hair and facial hair. I don't know. Let's watch
His
the
voice,
rest.
though, doesn't sound anything like the originals, being way too deep and also missing any hint of an accent.
I'm with the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, UBCS for short.
I'm a member of the Biohazard Countermeasure Force sent by Umbrella Incorporated.
Carlos, character-wise, though, is still great here. He's still the same flirty, wisecracking, but golden-hearted boy we all know. And I think his relationship with Jill is handled really well in this game. Jill understandably going from standoffish and untrustworthy toward him,
Really? Way to go, partner. One step ahead.
Not your partner.
to them proving themselves to each other through their actions to work together, save each other, and escape the city.
I'm not gonna die on you, leave you in a cold, cruel, Carlosless world.
Okay.
To the point where Carlos goes out of
I
his
don't
way
like
to fetch
him
the
with-
vaccine to
without
save Jill
beard.
When she's been
Oh.
infected by Nemesis. RE3 Remake expands his role and playtime significantly here, which is welcome. But that said, it's very disappointing that now it's Carlos who goes through the RPD. Because
Oh.
obviously the place is a lot more meaningful to Jill, who visited the location in OG to gear up and retrieve her signature lockpick. It would have been really cool and possibly heartfelt to have her revisit the station and reminisce on her time as a STARS officer one last time. But something I
Oh.
appreciate that was added was a cameo from Marvin, confronting a now zombified Brad, and because he hesitated to shoot, he is bitten by him.
I love
this
Marvin.
leads perfectly into what he tells Leon in RE2 Make.
And don't make my mistake. If you see one of those things, uniform or not, you do not hesitate.
Likewise, Kendo also gets a cameo appearance, and we're conveyed his friendship with Jill clearly. The scene with him is foreshadowing what happens to him in RE2 Make. Though it would have been cool if the scene included Kendo giving Jill some kind of badass weapon attachment he had been working on, like a part for her samurai edge or something. Lieutenant Mikhail in OG was a delirious squad leader racked over the loss of his men, putting his own life at risk to somehow justify their loss. In RE3 Make, he's a lot more put together and a real leader of his men,
Yeah, he
talking
was
Jill
great.
into assisting them. And like in OG, he sacrifices himself to Nemesis, but in an even more awesome way.
Get off my cage.
Yeah.
Sparta.
Tell him.
The monthly snack
Oh,
box
come
is
on
packed full of
now.
confection.
Nikolai in OG was a supervisor meant to collect combat data on the BOWs rampaging through Raccoon City, but after the UBCS squads were wiped out and few soldiers remained, he saw that as an opportunity and started killing the other soldiers as a way of gaining more bargaining power with the information of the BOWs he had gathered. He was a cutthroat, self-interested character, but still one of Rezi's more down-to-earth villains, having a calm but
Down-to-earth
ruthless
villain.
demeanor and very simple motivations. In RE3 Make, his
He's a
ham
complete
has been cranked
asshole.
up by a lot, explicitly taking a lot of pleasure in his dirty deeds, and going on and on about how he loves money. He's been rewritten as a sort of double agent, working under Umbrella but planning to sell the combat data he gathers to an unknown third party, which I feel may be a call forward to the organization that Wesker's a part of by Code Veronica. There's now this arc about Nikolai challenging Jill to be more ruthless, which she is, by the end shooting Nikolai and leaving him to die. Now this is a hell of a lot more lame than getting the opportunity to shoot him down with a rocket launcher. I do appreciate though how the T-Virus vaccine was incorporated more into the story in the third act, as another important goal of the characters than just escaping the city. As the ending approached, I felt a growing pit in my stomach as I realized what's been removed. In OG, one of the endings involved Barry motherfucking Burton flying in to rescue Jill and
Really?
Carlos.
Barry from Resident Evil 1? They removed that! Why?
Depending on your choices, you could also hear him on the radio tower beforehand. It was seriously awesome seeing him again after RE1 and seeing him flying into the hellhole that was Raccoon City to rescue his comrade. So then I must ask, where the fuck is he? I can't even think of any excuse they would possibly use to just remove him like this. This cut is simply ludicrous and deflates the extra element of triumph from the ending. If RE2 Make's ending left me feeling confused and unsatisfied, then this game's ending left me utterly baffled and unsatisfied. Speaking of which, gone too are the multiple endings. There were only 2 in OG, but just imagine how they could have been fleshed out for there to be more of them. Have it be like RE1, which ending you get would be based on how thorough you were in scouring the map and completing certain objectives, deciding who lives and who dies. You can have an ending where Carlos dies but Jill makes it out alone, one where both Carlos and Jill escape, one where Carlos dies but Jill is saved by Barry, and one where Carlos and Jill are both saved by Barry, as the best ending for completing all the objectives. Hell, if you want to get cheeky, you could even have a bad ending if you totally fail all that, where Jill doesn't have time to make it out and is nuked along with Raccoon City.
Oh shit!
And you give her unique monologues befitting of each ending before the credits roll, acting as a bookend to her monologue at the beginning of the game. Also removed is the tragic newscast covering the nuking of Raccoon City, and all of the epilogue screens, which were really cool rewards after beating the game that would change with each successive playthrough, showing off what all the Resi characters were getting up to post Raccoon City. Randomly, however, one area where RE3 Make blows 2 out of the water is in its actual faithful recreation of the original game's soundtrack. The reprisal of RE3's ending theme is simply amazing.
So, we finished some of the chapters of this video. Let's move on to this one. This one is short. It's only 5 minutes. This is the cut content. We already know what was caught, but this video only focuses on that. So maybe it's good that we also watch this one. So, oh, okay, I forgot. It's from a channel called Evil Bleats. And here we go, guys. Let's go. It's only 5 minutes. Let's watch.
The Resident Evil 3 Remake is a game with mixed reception to say the least. While it is a very enjoyable game, it did leave out a ton of content from the original Resident Evil 3, which left many diehard fans with a bitter taste. With that being said, here's all the cut content from the Resident Evil 3 Remake.
Thank you.
So there was a bunch of files that never made it into the final product. This includes anti-beta protocols, anti-gamma protocols, Bobby's journal, Carmania note, the current status of stars, Moon's donut notice, notice of construction, and the pharmacy notice. Nemesis had quite a few design changes throughout development. These concepts here show Nemesis suited in different costumes,
Wow.
and some even had him
I like the one on the right. Look how amazing is that.
equipped with a minigun. Shown here is a few early concepts for the Hunter Y and the Hunter B. In the original Resident Evil 3, the clock tower was a fairly important place. This is where Jill solves several puzzles, fights Nemesis,
they
and
cut
Carlos
that
too has several
completely.
things to do while Jill recovers inside the chapel within this building. Ultimately, Capcom decided to cut the clock tower sequence almost entirely and only makes an appearance for a boss fight. This left many fans filled with disappointment as this was a big part of the game. So the ending we got in the Resident Evil 3 remake was quite different from the original. Whereas the original game ends in Jill needing to work her way out of the factory to reach a helicopter before the city is destroyed, the remake scraps that idea and repeats many of the themes and general designs of the lab at the end of the Resident Evil 2 remake.
I love
In
this
this
boss
concept
fight.
art, we can see the origins of Nemesis and how he was created. And there's also some art showing how terribly wrong this experiment on Nemesis went. It is very likely
Ooh.
that Capcom did have plans to include this in the game, in the form of a cutscene. In the original game, we had the mine thrower, and in the remake it was scrapped and replaced with the grenade launcher. This was one of the few that made sense to be cut, as it really didn't have much use in the original. Depending on which platform one used, the original game had 8 costumes, some of them serious, others silly, and one from Dino Crisis. Unfortunately, these costumes never made it into the remake, and instead we only got 2 costumes, being the STARS uniform and Jill's classic uniform. Crafting ammunition was a new feature in the original Resident Evil 3 and gave players a great sense of control with regards to how they wanted to play. Enhanced ammunition is simply handgun bullets or shotgun shells that are far more powerful than their normal variants. After making the same type of ammunition 7 times in a row, players would have the option of crafting regular or enhanced ammunition, and it made each playthrough unique if someone wanted to specialize in only one weapon. For some reason, this entire concept was ignored in the Resident Evil 3 remake, which really doesn't make any sense considering that it was in Resident Evil 7. Shown here is concept art of Jill's apartment. After inspection, it seems that Capcom did have plans for Jill to explore her apartment and uncover some chilling scenes like the one shown in this concept art. The original game featured several points where the player would be faced with a sudden decision to make. An example of this is Nemesis arriving without warning and Jill needing to decide to stay and fight or run for safety, forcing her way to find key items
I was never
in other
grabbed by
locations.
this.
The premise was interesting, but ultimately made no real difference in terms of player progression. This was something that we never got to see in the remake, which if added could have given the game more replayability. In the clock tower sequence of Resident Evil 3, there were giant spider enemies. Since the clock tower sequence never made it in the game, we never got to see the giant spider enemies. However, we still did get to see a similar spider enemy called Drain-Deimos in the remake. The blue herb was an item that cured poison in the original game. In the remake, if you were to get poison, you would instead use a green herb, which would cause Jill to puke up bugs, thus curing the poison. Raccoon Park was yet another big location from the original that never made it into the remake. An enemy exclusively at the park was the Gravedigger, which was a boss encounter. The fan favorite Mercenaries game mode was in the original game and could be obtained after beating the game. This was most likely scrapped and replaced with Resident Evil Resistance. In the original game, a fan favorite character, Barry Burton, did make an appearance by rescuing Jill and Carlos with a chopper. There was no such appearance in the remake. The original Resident Evil 3 had a small reward for diligent players, a compilation of epilogues that would detail what happened to the other characters that survived the destruction of Raccoon City, even foreshadowing the events of Resident Evil Code Veronica and Resident Evil 4 with Chris, Claire, and Leon's epilogues. The main problem was that players would have to replay the game at least 8 times to receive all of them. Early designs for the altered Nemesis were quite different from what we ultimately got. Shown here, it seems that Capcom had plans for the altered form to be more aquatic. Zombie crows was another enemy type that never made it into the game. They were larger and more aggressive than regular crows and will sit patiently unless they consider you a threat. And there you have it. That is all the cut content from the Resident Evil 3 remake. Thanks for watching.
Thanks. Okay guys, so that was all. I kind of hope that I have managed to find out all of the differences in the remake and the original. If there is anything else, please do let me know down in the comments. I watched a mixture of 3 videos. Man, they cut a lot of stuff. Now I can understand why so many die-hard Resident Evil fans didn't like Resident Evil 3 remake that much. But in the meantime, I also figured out that they have actually changed some things in the Resident Evil 2 remake, but it wasn't that big of a deal. I think people showed more kindness to the remake of Resident Evil 2 than the remake of Resident Evil 3. And I can't know why. The most significant change, in my opinion, that they made was removing Barry from the last scene. Barry was a great character, in my opinion. In Resident Evil 1, he first was serving Captain Wesker because Captain Wesker had his family hostage, and but in the end, he helped Jill, and they all, if you got the best ending, all of them found a way out of the mansion and ran away. It would have been really wholesome for the fans to meet him again at the end of Resident Evil 3 when he calms down, comes to the city that is about to get nuked just to save Jill. That would be so wholesome to watch. And even though I haven't played Resident Evil 3 original, I still kind of feel betrayed that they did that. I mean, like, why? There is not a good excuse. What's the reason for removing that? I can understand why probably they removed the clock tower section and stuff. You cannot excuse that either, but maybe they wanted to make the game shorter. But to remove a whole character that people love, I don't know, it's a sin. I don't know why they did that. One of the other things that I caught is that Carlos in the original wasn't as wholesome and a decent and kind guy as he was in the remake. And I kind of feel like, maybe I don't know much, but I kind of feel like I like the Carlos in the remake better. Also about Nikolai. It turns out that Nikolai in the original was just a hired hand who was doing his job without knowing the consequences. But the Nikolai in the remake was an absolute a-hole who still didn't know the consequences, but he was just being mean for the sake of being mean, you know what I mean? He was just pure evil. And one of the things that really surprised and confused me was the fact that he shot the antivirus on the roof. And why? I mean, why did he do that? I mean, like, you are about to die. The city is about to get nuked. Why do you have to go ahead and... I don't know, man. I was so pissed off by him. But yeah, guys, I now understand why some people didn't like this remake all that much. I can totally get it. Thank you so much for watching this video with me until the end, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Bye.